this, I'm going to try and not cry as much this time.
Well, we apologise ahead of time. Kim and I find this really, really hard to talk about.
I thought I might talk a little bit first about who the people are, the two men who share the plaque with Keith. They were both sons of clergymen, and like Keith were students at St John's College. Then known as St John's College, we're now known as the Cloisters up on the terrace. The three of the men succumbed to the pressure for young men to enlist. They were, and as students of theology, they no doubt faced huge personal inner conflicts over this process. None of the three has graves. James Edward Blythe Brooke was born in Surrey, England, and had migrated to Australia. He was the son of Father Benjamin Blythe Brooke, who lived and preached in Kent. James enlisted on October 16, 1915 at the age of 24, recording his occupation as student and his address was St John's College. In February 1960, he embarked for the war. He was twice admitted to hospital with influenza at Itard in northern France in April 1916. 2 months later, he was back in the field and thrust into what was the first action by the Australians, the Battle of the Somme. In a nighttime attack on July 29 on the ridge beyond the town of Poitiers, James, known to his mates as Parson, was hit by machine gun fire and fell dead in a shell hole. Noel Grosser listed his occupation as divinity student when he signed up in August of 1915. He was the youngest son of Father Canon Grosser, whose parish was at Midland Junction. Noel arrived in France in the May of 1916. He was wounded on June 19, 1960 and treated back in England and returned to France after being AWOL for a few days. On April 2nd, 1917, at the Battle of Noryl, in an attack against one of the villages fortified by the Germans as they fell back to their trenches, Noel Grosser was killed. He was buried in the field and his remains were not identified. He was aged 23. Now Keith. Keith was a peaceful man of God, declaring his occupation as divinity student when he signed up. He had in fact completed most of his studies at the Cloisters and had begun work in a parish at Queen's Park. He, like others, enlisted after he received a universal accusation of cowardice, a white feather. But he was no coward. He was courageous enough to go to war unarmed and to undertake some of the most heroic actions of any foot soldier. He ran vital communication wires through no man's land and maintained the lines of communication through the artillery barrages, and he also carried wounded and dying from the battlefields as a stretcher bearer. As we discussed 3 days ago, on the night Keith got news that he was the father of a son, he wrote to Dorothy the reasons he enlisted, in which he said he had been called by God. He went further to say that he felt he could not have been the husband to her and the father to Keith Jr. that he hoped to be had he not answered the call to duty. I don't know how I feel about that, but I am still overwhelmed by the anger that we grandchildren were robbed of this man. But I do understand what he meant by those words he penned as he celebrated Keith Jr.'s birth. 25 years ago today, I stood in a French field with Mum, Dad and Buffy and members of the tiny town of Hespecourt, which is deep in the Somme. The French villagers and some more distant people embraced us like family when they heard of our pilgrimage and thanked us profusely for the sacrifice Keith and others had made. One of the people who attended our little service in the field was a young schoolgirl aged 14. And I have been a pen pal with ever since for the past 25 years. And this morning, I got up to an email which comes from Matilda Adan, and she sends her wishes to us. Let's read you a bit of it. She says, she asks about how the memorial has gone with your grandfather, and she says, I'm sure that you will come back to France one day, and we will be together and have some time together. She congratulates us on the birth of the two new granddaughters, and fills us in with information about her family. She's now a mother of two herself, and she sends kisses and love to us all from France. I've travelled extensively through France, and that sentiment of expressed by the French people, some heard total strangers, was often made to us. Somehow I feel personally that it puts Keith's death, Keith and Aubrey's sacrifice, into perspective. On September 18, we stood in that field on the exact spot where Keith died, struggling to know how to express the sorrow. Dad recited the ode. They will not grow old, as we who are left grow old. Age will not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. As the French do, they took us to lunch in two of the farmhouses up the road in the little one-street town of Hespercord, called Le Grand Room. Is there anybody else who'd like to have anything to say? Please.
I just want to, now I've been totally undone. I want to remind us about Dorothy and the fact that women are often really forgotten in all of this. I get a little bit sort of upset about that because we were brought up living next door to Dorothy, and this is Keith's wife and my father's mother. And of course, her sacrifice continued to play out for many, many years until she died at 83. And on the 18th of September, 100 years ago today, she was living her life as she was hoped that would continue to be lived, and which was that she had a husband in France, but the war was ending. And it was optimistic that he would be home soon. Then on the 7th of November, she celebrated the first birthday of our father, Keith. But on the 11th of November, she received from the Reverend Ken Elphick a telegram which delivered to her the news that that would not be. She then got on the train and went from Merredin overnight to Perth to tell Nellie that news. While around the world everybody was celebrating because it was Armistice Day. It's always upset me that that was the case.
Can I just, Faith also came with Nellie on the train, and they had no idea that
That's
Keith
right.
had
They
died.
met her.
They met her at the Perth railway
That's
station,
right.
and there were celebrations all around them
Yeah.
in the station, and Faith. And then they went over to Bowen's tea rooms and all had a cup of
Yeah.
tea there.
Yeah.
And that, yes, Faith
That's
remembers
right.
that very clearly.
Because the telegram that Grandma sent from Merredin just said meet me on the
Yes,
train.
yes.
Yeah, it didn't say why.
No.
Yeah. So Grandma then was faced with the fact that she had a 1-year-old child, and she was the sole breadwinner. And she went back to Merredin and she started school teaching again in the year 1919. But when my father was at an age where he could actually attend preparatory school, she thought it was important that he went somewhere where he was with men. And so she went and had a very, very tough time, but eventually found a house in Guildford. It was very hard to find anywhere to live. She found a house in Guildford where we ended up living, and she got a job at Midland School, and she taught there for many, many years, and Dad went to Guildford Grammar School from a very early age. She was very highly thought of as a school teacher, and I thought that the people from Aubrey's side of the family would be really interested to just hear this little piece that was written in the West Australian newspaper in December 1951, when Dorothy retired after, well, it was 28 years at Midland School, but in fact she'd been teaching for 36 years. And it says, her first pupil and the man who was her headmaster at Canowna, Mr. Martin Darcy, in 1901, were among those who farewelled Mrs. D. O'Murray last night at a social held at the Midland Junction State School. I was actually there, I was 7. I think Kim and Paul must have been, Paul was just a baby, but they must have been babysat that night, I think, because Kim doesn't remember it at all. Mrs. Murray, who has been with the Education Department for 36 years, has been teaching at the Midland Junction for 28 years. Her first teaching post was in charge of 21 pupils at Lake Hines, near Wongan Hills. Her first pupil was Faith Murray, now Mrs. Finicum. Faith Murray, whose family was farming in the then newly opened district, had a brother Keith, who 4 years later married her teacher. Mr. Murray was killed in France during World War I. Mrs. Murray resumed teaching in 1919. A presentation was made to her last night on behalf of the Midland Junction Parents and Citizens Association by the President, R.M. Marsh. Mrs. Murray will leave for England in February for a year's holiday. And that she did. She had the most wonderful 12 months in England, living at the Girls Friendly Society, which always amuses me. And we, at that point, while she was overseas for 12 months, moved into the house in Guildford and built her the cottage next door, which is where she lived all the time that we were being raised. And we had a fabulous relationship with her.
We're only related to your father, Keith. You see, yes, Keith and Aubrey are simply step-brothers. But of course, when they went away to the war, as did nearly all the young men in Wongan Hills, there was no farm labour available in Wongan, and so the girls of the family, that was Faith, Marjorie and Nancy, I think to a lesser extent Johnny, but certainly Faith and Marjorie, really had to help their father, Matthew Henry Murray, carry on the farm, and I think the fact is he simply wasn't a farmer. He played the organ. He never should have left Kalgoorlie, where he was a magistrate, but got lured away by actually Canon. Can't think of his name. John Saunders' grandfather, who was later at Christchurch. I'll think of his name, sorry. I wasn't prepared for this. Yes, he encouraged a lot of people from Kalgoorlie to take up this land in Wongan. as I say, I have to say I don't think Matthew Henry was really a farmer.